Hey everybody. One thing I hear a lot from people is how natural my tanks look, and I always take that as a compliment. I assume it's meant as a compliment, but even if it's not, I always take it as a compliment. And I say even if it's not for a reason, because a natural looking tank doesn't necessarily mean what a lot of people might think it means without giving it a little bit of thought. And I was out Pretty Boy Reservoir yesterday. I was trying to shoot some video to get some scenic views, and I got to thinking about this. And so today I want to talk about my natural looking tanks and how I set them up, a little bit of my philosophy behind, just what I think about the natural look and how I achieve it, and so on and so forth. So not in any way going to be a how-to or a telling you how to set your tank up, or even explaining specifically how I set any of my tanks up. I just want to sort of have a discussion about what I think about a natural look and how I approach the tank. So first of all, just having a lot of rocks, wood, and plants in the tank do not a natural look make. I've seen a lot of gardens that look very unnatural even though they got lots of plants in them. And it's sort of, if you think about the difference between a formal Victorian garden, which is all neat and orderly and symmetrical, versus a cottage garden, which basically looks like weeds growing in the woods. One looks very natural, one looks very man-controlled and contrived. And that's the whole purpose of the Victorian garden, is to have that I've dominated nature, man over nature sort of look, whereas the cottage garden end of it is sort of the other end of the spectrum. It's sort of man living with and communing with nature end of it. And that's the end I tend to look at. If you look at my gardens out in the yard, or if you look at any of my fish tanks, you will see that I don't really go by what the normal sort of format for laying out a tank would be. If you're going to do a planted tank, almost anywhere you look, I guarantee will tell you put the short plants in front, the medium plants in the middle, and the tall plants in back, and you basically set your tank up like a set of bleachers. And while you can still have a very beautiful tank, having it set up in this sort of traditional garden style, because your garden should really, a lot of times is recommended that that's how you set your gardens up. You have the smaller plants in the front, and it makes sense if you want to be able to maximize your space and see the most amount of plants and so on and so forth. But it doesn't look natural, because nowhere you go out in the real world do plants grow like that. They don't line themselves up in this nice, neat, orderly fashion as you move away from your sight line. And as you move around to different angles, you see things from different angles and so on and so forth. So some aspects of natural are not natural at all, or I should say some aspects of planted are not natural. And the same goes for woodwork. If you've got your woodwork and it's all neat and orderly and in rows, again, this seldom happens out in nature. What I find does happen in nature is you'll get, I'll call them themes, I guess, or sort of an overarching group of lines maybe. All the trees will be growing upright, but you'll always have that one that's fallen and it goes across that line. You've always got this disruption somewhere. You've always got this sort of disturbance in the flow. If you look at the rocks, you'll see all the rocks come out of the ground at the same angle, but then you always have that one weird big boulder that sticks up, or you have a rock slide that came down the hill and totally disrupts the line of all the other rocks, and it just creates this sort of odd juxtaposition to the rest of the flow of everything else you're looking at. And you find this almost everywhere and with almost everything. So I always try to incorporate a little bit of that into my tanks as well. I don't do the plants, short to tall, front to back kind of thing. I put them where I like them. I put them where I think they're going to serve a purpose, either blocking sight lines or where I just visually find them to be appealing. And if they do block some of the view in the further part of the tank, I just have to move my position and look around them a little bit or something. As far as the rocks, I always do that same sort of thing I just mentioned. I, will lean all the rocks this way, but then I've got one or two that stick this way. And then I've got smaller random rocks on the bottom. And that randomness breaks up that unnatural. Everything's so neat and orderly, it looks like it's been contrived. It looks like it's been put together. So I always try to go with that. You can see this big piece of wood right here. That's sort of my disruption line that goes through this tank. I've got this nice big sweeping piece of wood here. If you look behind me, it sweeps up and out of the tank. And then you got this sort of weird thing right here that just kind of breaks the line. It doesn't work right with the flow of everything else in the tank. The rocks are the same way. There's one big rock right behind me that even if I moved, you wouldn't be able to see it. But it sticks up at the odd angle to all the other rocks. And then, of course, I got the stuff, smaller rocks and everything down on the bottom. and that gives you a very natural visual effect. You know, you don't get that kind of symmetry and that nice evenness of lines out in nature. The other aspect of nature that a lot of people don't seem to take into account, at least people that don't regularly get out into nature, they just sort of have this sort of idea of what they think the woods and forests and pristine lakes and pristine rivers and all that stuff are. In the real world, they're dirty. They really are. I mean, a lot of people see my videos of the stream across the street. As beautiful as that is, and sparkling water and crystal clear, if I picked up one of those rocks and showed them to you, there's no way you would take that rock home and put that in your aquarium. You know, natural looking or not, because it's covered in algae and growth and stuff all over it, and silt and dirt. You know, the slightest little disturbance gets the water all cloudy. Almost anywhere you go, you're going to find like mucky, muddy stuff on the side and rotten leaves and vegetation, and you know, it's just, you never get this beautiful, pristine look. And that's what got me to thinking about it yesterday when I was out doing my outdoors video at Pretty Boy. I was looking around at all of the different areas where it might be this pretty view of a little stream flowing in, but that's sort of at the macro view. Once you got up close to it, you realized all the bottom was all murky, and of course if you get the smell of that stinky rotten vegetation smell and all that, but that's natural. You know, we use the word natural a lot, and you know, really think about what natural means. There's a lot of things that are natural that aren't necessarily good. You know, arsenic is natural, dog poop is natural. You know, we do the same thing with organic. You know, arsenic and dog poop are both organic as well, and it doesn't necessarily make them desirable things that you'd want, you know, in your house or your aquarium or anywhere else. So when I set my tanks up to look natural, I do not only the physical stuff I talked about, but I also not only allow for, but I kind of expect and want a little bit of that dirtiness, if you want to call it dirtiness. I don't think about it as dirtiness. I know a lot of other people do. They seem to complain about the algae in my tanks, or I've got cyanobacteria in my tanks or whatever. And again, as I've said before, that's other people's problems, not mine. I don't see it as a problem or something that bothers me at all, because it's what goes into making my tanks look natural. So many people say my tanks look natural. They don't necessarily say they look pristine or they look beautiful or they look like they'd win awards or anything like that. And that's not what I'm going for. I'm going for natural. And natural has algae in it. It's got debris floating around in the water. It's got sticks that stick up at weird angles. It's got rocks that are out of place. It's got leaves that have been chewed on by fish. If you look at this big clump of Java right here, that's got like clumps of cyanobacteria growing on it, and the leaves edges are all chewed up from the fish. If you look right here, you can see that bright green. That's cyanobacteria. There's algae that's growing on the wood. And that's what it would look like if you went out to the river and looked at wood. You're going to see cyanobacteria and algae and stuff like that growing on them. The challenge is finding that balance, because as much as I might want a natural look, as I've been explaining, there's a lot of aspects of natural that I don't want in my tank. I don't want it covered in cyanobacteria. I don't want it covered in algae. I don't want mud and dead leaves floating around in there. You know, I see dead fish and dead animals and stuff floating in the river all the time. I don't want that in my tanks. And so it's not a natural environment, and I have to find that balance between maintaining it with a natural look but still having a functional aquarium that is appealing to look at. It still has to have an adequate nitrogen cycle and the proper circulation, and I've still got to be able to get in there and clean it. I got to have room to get between the rocks and the glass so I can gravel vac it. I got to be able to get in and wipe the glass down, you know, so there's a functionality to it that also goes into when you're setting a tank up. If you want it to look natural, you still have to take into account that you're going to have plumbing and hardware and a heater and some power heads and so on and so forth. There's that balance you have to find between totally natural and looks natural for a very unnatural environment, because let's face it, it's a box of water that has fish swimming around in it. You know, I've put some rocks and some wooden plants in there to make them feel a little more at home, but it's a box of water in my basement. There's only so much you can do to call that a natural environment for the fish to swim around in. And so it's a fine line between what looks natural versus what looks unnatural, and then between what looks natural and then what is functional. And I think I do a pretty good job of kind of threading that needle of making tanks that are functional and decent looking. Again, I know I'm not going to win any awards. I'm not trying to win any awards. I don't really care about that. I just like my tanks to be enjoyable. And what my tanks really do for me personally is they bring my outdoors in. I spend a lot of time out on the water. I spend a lot of time fishing. I spend a lot of time in and around rivers, creeks, streams, ponds, lakes, etc. And I hate the winter. I hate being cooped up in the house. And this is my place to be that feels very natural to me. I don't want to come down here and look at, you know, very artificial looking boxes. You know, I don't keep fish for the appeal of looking at fish. I can go, you know, watch YouTube videos and see what fish look like. I go for a very natural environment. I try to use lighting that replicates or simulates natural sunlight as much as I can. It really does trick my brain into thinking I'm outside. It does. It actually has you know, benefits of helping me sleep, emotional benefits, all sorts of stuff by having natural lighting in my fish tank. So there's a lot of reasons I, you know, make my fish tanks look the way I do, but it's very deliberate. And again, it's not just some random mash of throwing lots of rocks and leaves, and you know, you can have a lot of rocks and woodwork and plants and stuff in a tank and still have it look very unnatural. So as I said, when anybody says my tanks are very natural looking, I always take that as a compliment, even if they do mean they look like they're full of algae and cyanobacteria and you got dirt and crud all over everything, because that's also a very natural looking tank, and they may mean that. And if they do, so be it. Again, I'm going to take that as a compliment any way you slice it. So thanks for watching this. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight into the way I think about my fish tanks, and maybe help give you a little bit of inspiration into how you can think about yours, and maybe give you a little bit of new ways to think about how you want to set your next one up. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget, this one here is my 125-gallon New World tank. Thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.